everybody, I'm John Sanders.
And I'm Tobias Sweeney.
And welcome to our last video on the road to Canterbury. Huzzah! Woo! Yeah, you went more Middle English with that one.
I always do. That was weird. In our last video, we are going to give you a brief overview of our game and how to play it. This is our little game box right here with a little lid and those little pieces inside.
We'll get into those in a bit, but the purpose of this video is to talk about how to play it, and then also why we made the decisions we did, and how those fit into those four elements that we talked about last time.
And just for a review, those four elements were the material aesthetic, the writing, the mechanics, and the goals.
Yes! At least somebody remembers.
Alright, so welcome. This is our game.
Canterbury Tales, the board game. Working title. So much. So you start by getting different as it saith may cards, or virtue and trait cards as we called them earlier on in the process, that have things like gluttony, or free will, or frivolity, things that are important to your character. Based upon those things, the general prologue begins, in which you go through and begin to explain who your character is and why they have the different traits that they do. And for every trait you describe, you get a text card, which are cards that will help you tell tales when we get to the tale-telling part. And for every trait that you talk about that's about your physical appearance rather than your virtues or anything like that, you get a gloss card, which is gloss. It's things that's on the outside, like characters, morals, places that will be able to make your tale a little bit more alive. Both of these things will count for points later on in the game.
And so after everyone has gone around in the prologue phase and introduced themselves and described themselves, we then draw lots to determine the order in which we will be telling tales.
And then after that, it moves on to the prologue phase.
So while the tale teller is preparing their tale, the other pilgrims squabble over some extra gloss cards. So right now we have the prioress here on the left and the miller on the right, and they are going to use their semith cards in order to make claims for the gloss cards in the middle. And it would go something like this. Oh yes, as the prioress, I'm very wealthy and we have a good amount of gold in the abbey's treasuries.
Well, I'm sure you got that gold through normal means, but in my experience, it's always through people's own means and not the grace of God.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're just envious of my giant piles of gold, you filthy peasant.
Oh.
As he concedes, I take the gold gloss card and add it to my hand.
All of the used semith cards are turned over to show that they cannot be used again, and the betting continues until all of them are gone or there's no more semith cards to be used. After all that squabbling's done with, the tale teller gets a chance to tell their tale. They do this using the combination of text cards and gloss cards that they've acquired over the course of play, and they get a chance to get more text cards through using their semith cards during the course of their tale. So, a typical tale might look like this. Once a long time ago, there was a youth, and at one point, somebody that was passing through turned out to be a royal, a queen as a matter of fact. And he is gripped by heartache. His love maketh a white heart smerten. He says, oh, I need to go and find her. I need to seek her out. So he got his friend, who is the cook's daughter, to help him find this person. So he begins this search for her. And they look on and on and on, and they finally find the castle where this is. And he goes forth to her court and says, Queen, I love you so much. You should be my love. I should be with you. But he was so young. He was so inexperienced. Queen laughed in his face and told everyone how funny it was to her. And his reputation was soiled or besmuttered. And he gets very sad about this and is going back with his companion, the daughter. And the daughter on the way back says, you know what? I'm not so sad about the fact that your reputation was soiled because I have loved you all along. And this story just goes to show you that love is queen above all things and love conquers all. Aww. After the pilgrim is told their tale, the gloss cards that they used are collected and placed under their character coaster. This represents an increased reputation with the group and will give them more power to vote later on.
Then the game proceeds to the next tale teller, who uses their text cards to tell a new tale. They now may use up to 2 of the text cards from the previous tale if they kind of want to riff on what the other characters are talking about, but they don't have to. This continues until each player has told one tale, at which point the pilgrims arrive at the shrine of Sir Thomas Becket in Canterbury.
Once there, it's time to vote for who told the best tale. Those are done using these alms coins, which have the color of the pilgrim and the number that represents the tale that they want to vote for. The person who you vote for gets all of the glows cards, or your reputation, that you've gotten over the course of the first round of tales.
And then, after we leave the shrine of Sir Thomas Becket and head back to London, there is another round of telling of tales, in which each player tells one more tale. But this time, the glows cards that they use to tell the tales are placed on top of their character coasters instead of on the bottom.
This reputation, this vote that they'll be giving is public, so I would just say, yes, I think the miller told a very good tale, or so on and so forth. And then those would be added to the person's score.
And then the secret vote is revealed, and then all of those glows cards would be awarded to the corresponding players, and then you count up the number of glows cards you received from both the private and the public vote, and then the number of leftover text cards you have in your hand, and then that becomes your final score.
The person with the most wins is the best tellteller on the road to Canterbury.
And that is that. Alright, now that we have told you how to play our game, we have showed you our game, we're going to talk to you about our decision-making process when we were actually designing the game.
So our design goal was mainly to create a storytelling game that captured the feel of Chaucer. So the types of stories that were told, the way that they were told, the people who were telling them, and the whole world of medieval England as Chaucer saw it.
But while we were doing that, we also wanted to make sure that this game would be accessible to people who hadn't read the Canterbury Tales yet, but still appeal to people who had read them already.
The goal was that even if you don't know what happened exactly in the tales by the time you finish this game experience, you'll have an idea of how the tales feel and what kind of stories are told and how they are told.
And now we're going to talk about how our game creates theme and narrative through the 4 elements that we mentioned in our previous video: material aesthetic, writing, mechanics, and goals. The first thing that we were concerned with when designing our game was the material aesthetic. And so the way we achieved this was primarily through the art. So on a lot of the cards and all the character coasters, there are pictures of actual medieval artwork, many of which are taken from medieval manuscripts. Like the Ellesmere manuscript, which is where the primary source of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales is actually found. Another way we sort of replicate the medieval manuscript feel is through the game board, which has the text in the middle and then the gloss on the sides, because that is actually how manuscripts were written, where the main text was in the middle and then other people would come in and write little notes in the margins. Another way that we are conscious of the material aesthetic is the font. We used the Old English font because there isn't a Middle English font, unfortunately, but it still has that same sort of medieval feeling to it. And then the last thing we used is the alms box, because that creates the whole, like, going to the pilgrimage of a religious nature sort of thing.
The second thing we were conscious of while designing this game experience was the writing. Something that you ought to be conscious of if you're doing a game about any literary work, especially one that talks about storytelling as much as Chaucer does. One way we did this was we made sure that each of the cards were written in Middle English as well as Modern English. This is because we like the way that Middle English was spoken and the way that it's written, and since it's kind of foreign but at the same time somewhat familiar, so we decided to make that happen. In order for that to happen, though, we had to go through the text itself, the Chaucerian text, and other works by Chaucer and other works in the Middle Ages, that we could get a grasp of how to form grammar and how to spell things, even though the spelling was not the same across any board at all. But we had to go through and actually find references in the text to a lot of the things that we wrote. And though it was a laborious process, I think it really helped make this game what it is. On top of that, in a more subtle way, we also had to try to shape the narrative so that the tales that were going to be told in our game were tales that would occur in the Canterbury Tales. A common misconception about the Middle Ages, for example, is that tales were all about knights and dragons and castles and damsels, but in the Canterbury Tales, there is no dragon. There's not a single dragon in the entire thing, and in fact, Chaucer makes fun of the whole romantic notion of knights fighting out and going on these quests in his own tale within the tales, called the Tale of Sir Topas. So in order to make sure this occurred, we had to make different references to more mundane activities, like somebody is spying on someone else, advances are made in love, or somebody receives a gift, rather than a dragon appears or this sort of thing occurs, just so that we could make it that this whole game encompasses the feel of the tales within the writing.
The next thing I'm going to talk about is the mechanics of our game. And so the principal mechanic is our game is a storytelling game, and these stories are supposed to be for entertaining and pleasing one another, rather than pleasing the host, which is actually the case in the Canterbury Tales, but because there is this contest going on, but it doesn't seem like in the actual context of the tales themselves, they aren't really interacting with the host that much, and they're mostly trying to settle disputes between themselves or just entertain each other. So it seems like they don't even really care about the host. So we decided not to care about the host. The other mechanic we're going to talk about is the use of lots. So in our game, we use lots to determine the order in which people tell tales, which is exactly what happens in the Canterbury Tales. As before they set out from London, they all draw lots to determine who's going to tell the first tale, and it turns out to be the knight. And then also, as within the context of the contest that is going on in the Canterbury Tales, they're supposed to tell 2 tales on the way up and 2 tales on the way back, but since Chaucer never finished it, we don't get quite there. So we decided to have 1 tale on the way to Canterbury and then 1 tale on the way back from Canterbury, because if it was 2, it would just be really long. And then the final way that our mechanics sort of create this feel is through the use of voting, which actually segues really nicely into goals.
And so that brings us to the goal of the game, which is, like many games, to get the most points. But how you get those points is through telling the best tale. We kept coming back to this again and again through our design process, whether we wanted to have the points be given through glows cards and how many of those you used, or how much of a story you can get through without being interrupted because you're trying to make sure everybody else's virtues aren't besmirched. But really, at the end of the day, it comes down to you need a vote system so other people can tell you whether your tale is good or not. And the points that you get throughout the game by telling your tale, the glows cards, can be used to help the vote for somebody else rather than yourself. It makes you more attentive to other players as you're playing, and more attentive to what makes a good story, which really to us is the whole point of a storytelling game and Chaucer in general. So that's our video. That's it. The quest for Canterbury is over for now.
Thank you for watching. We hope you guys really enjoyed our videos. We had a lot of fun making them.
And, you know, from here, maybe you'll see it in store someday if we get a good enough published copy and then somehow make it working. But for right now, we've made it to Canterbury.
Now we have to make it back and tell another tale. On the...
Or we could just leave it unfinished. That's a Chaucer
joke. Kids got a joke.
Read, kids.
Yeah.
So yeah, good.
Yeah. I mean, that's basically all we need to talk about, right?
That's all we need to talk about.
Okay.
We're done.
It's weird.
Yeah.
Being done.
Yeah. Metaphysical poets and all that.
Yeah, we're making a weird John.
English jokes.
Weird.
John Donne? Yeah. Now you get it. The Flea, man. I love The Flea.
John Donne's just like diet.
Diet?
Diet
Metaphysical?
He's diet Shakespeare. Is that it?
What do you think?
That was good.
Cool.
Alright. Swag in the bag. Tag it, bag it, send it to post.
Ready?
Yeah.
Like,
breathe.
oh.
I mean, you're bending too. I mean, I'm usually more of a waterbender.
I'd expect you that. I think I'm.
Except for when I'm drunk. I'm drunk and trying to bend fire. It's bad.
That's not good at all.
No. Nobody wants to see that.
Nobody does.
What is that game actually called?
I've been calling, well, I called in the document, the Canterbury Tales board game.
Yeah, Canterbury Tales. The board game.
Yeah.
Okay. Alright, we should, yeah.
So, after the teller tells their tale, so, after the teller tells, tongue twister. I'm just gonna cut this one.
Flip it, yo.
Flip it. Flip it good.
I don't think that's how it goes, John.
That's not how it goes at all. Okay. And that will be used for more voting power later in the game. Voting powder.
I'm serious. Okay, come on, we're going. This is serious, John. This isn't a game.
Material aesthetic.
Okay, so the first thing we were conscious of when we were making this game was the medieval, I was gonna say medieval aesthetic, I mean, which is true, but we want to call it the material aesthetic, yeah.
It's recording. Oh.
Look at me. Tell me I'm beautiful.
Way to make it weird, John.
Way to make it weird, John.